English whiskey. Not from the English Whiskey Distillery, but is a whiskey made in England. Anyone getting sick of all the coverage that I'm giving to English whiskey? I'm sure a few of you probably are. But a large part of why I'm covering so much English whiskey is because I've obviously been doing a lot of videos and reviews about new distilleries in 2023, and there are a lot of them, and there are a hell of a lot of them in England. And a lot of what they're making is really good and really interesting, including this stuff from the Cotswolds. So this is the Cotswolds Single Malt Whiskey Bourbon Cask Edition. So this is kind of a limited edition, I can guess you could call it. I don't know if there's going to be more batches of this after this one's gone, but we know from the label this one is one of a reasonably small batch of 2,500 bottles, and it's a cask strength whiskey. Speaking of that strength, this one is 59.1% ABV. We also know that it's non-chill filtered and it's natural colour. As for an age for this one, we don't know. It's a no age statement release, although seeing as of at least as of early 2023, when I last talked to the people at the Cotswolds Distillery, their oldest release at that time was a 6.5-year-old whiskey, so this is likely to be young, very much on the young side, but that's not too bad. It's more and more the case that, especially over these last 2 or 3 years, I think we're seeing more and more new distilleries putting out young whiskey that's kind of bucking the trend of what we used to get, where we used to get a new distillery pop up and it would kind of be accepted that for the first sort of 6-7 years at least, you would get this product and it would be like, here's what we've got, it's not finished yet, but please buy it, because it will get better. But I think what we tend to be seeing more and more of now is new distilleries kind of tailoring their product to be good at a young age. We're seeing lots of young whiskies from new distilleries now, where it's not so much a work in progress anymore. It's more a case of, yes, it's young, but it's also good whiskey. As for price and value for money, this one you can get it from Cotswolds Distillery themselves for about £75. If you shop around, you can get it for about 70 or high 60s, which is kind of expensive, especially when you consider that it's a very young whiskey. But I do think it's a very well made whiskey, and the rest of the presentation does kind of justify that price point. So I personally, having tried this, I don't have a problem paying another £65-70 for a second bottle of this, and I may well do that. But it does really come down to how much you value your age statements. If you're the kind of person, which I probably used to be myself, that really, really values older whiskey, then this is possibly not for you. But if you're the kind of person that really enjoys a really well-made, cask strength, artisan crafted, high quality product despite being on the young side, then this one might be for you. So Cotswolds Distillery, which is obviously in the Cotswolds, I think they're kind of very much the poster boy for English whiskey at the moment. They may not have been the first English whiskey distillery, and they're not the largest English distillery, although after their very recent expansion that puts them very close. Apologies if you can hear some planes going over. It's a really hot day and I've had to open some windows. But the Cotswolds Distillery, it does seem like they've really won the hearts and minds of the whiskey enthusiasts. A lot of people talk about them and their products, and it seems that almost everybody really loves them. So let's get some in the glass. Let's lose that before it ends up in the glass as well. Taking extra care to not get any on the table, because cask strength whiskey is not good for wood. What glass am I using today, I hear you ask? You can't really see that, can you? It's my Cotswolds Distillery Glencairn, which I picked up when I was there, because I have been there. And it's an absolutely fantastic distillery to do a tour of. It's in a wonderful part of the English countryside. And they also have a really, really good restaurant on site too. So Cotswolds Bourbon Cask on the nose. very much a stereotypical kind of what you would expect from a high strength bourbon cask maturation. Some lovely honey, caramel notes, lemon, sugary caramel, a little bit of sweet vanilla, quite floral, but really nicely offset by some really nice dry, gristy barley notes. Also getting a little note of jelly sweets on the nose and a little hint of lime. I think that you can tell that it is a young whiskey, especially when you're nosing it. There is a little bit of a starchy youth, but really nothing too negative and nothing that would put me off buying this. Also, amongst that, those dry barley notes, getting a slight truffly farminess on the nose. So, fantastic on the nose, getting lots of distillery character, lots of influence from the cask, and something that I always like, lots of actual maltiness, notes coming through from the grain. So let's see how it tastes. You're not going to see too much haze there, because I am drinking this at the full cask strength of 59.1%, which I think is absolutely fine, even at this young age. But it's interesting to talk about any haze in this, and you will get English mist, as it were, if you add any water or ice, if that's your thing, to this one. But I think that it's interesting that at the Cotswolds distillery, they also make gin. They've been making gin for a very long time, so it's a popular way to raise some revenue while you're waiting for the whiskey to be old enough to sell. And the Cotswolds distillery, they've not dropped the gin venture. Now that their whiskey is ready, they're still making their gin. They're actually making quite a few different types of gin, and if you're into gin, it is good stuff. It's well worth checking out. But what I do think is interesting, that the Cotswolds gin, they actually market their gin as the cloudy G&T. They actually describe and push and market their gin as being non-chill filtered, and they advertise that haze and cloudiness as a positive selling point. So amazing work and amazing presentation from the Cotswolds, and also once again proof that the Scotch industry largely has what seems like a very low opinion of the intelligence of the average whiskey drinker. The beer industry and cider and now gin and even lemonades can market cloudiness and haze as a positive selling point, but for a lot of distilleries it seems that they still think that Scotch needs to be clear because Scotch drinkers won't understand. Anyway, on the palate on this one, more lovely fresh bourbon cask notes, getting lovely bright honeyed maltiness on the palate of this one, and that slightly sharp and sour citrus fruit note is back again, lovely sour lemon notes and a little bit of grapefruit. It really is a wonderfully fruity whiskey, and I think this is something that I picked up on quite a while ago, probably over a year ago now, when I reviewed the Cotswolds, what's it called, Founders Reserve STR thing, you know, the basic one, which is also a good whiskey. But I think I noticed in that one, when I tried that one, that it has a real distinct fruity note coming through from the malt, and that's just another sign that the Cotswolds distillery are really doing everything right, taking every care with every attention to detail, working with good grains, good yeast, and having a good long 4-day fermentation for all of their whiskey. Other notes on the palate, really nice rich caramel notes coming through, honey, more of that beautifully sharp fruitiness, and I really think that any hint of youth, any signs of immaturity and harshness that I detected a little bit on the nose with this one are really gone on the palate. It's a really pleasant, bold, intense, very rich and full-bodied whiskey, and this is really very much my happy place. For quite a few years now I've really loved high strength bourbon matured whiskey, and I think that's really something that all started with Bruichladdich. Anyone that's been following whiskey for a few years, you might remember that first kind of re-release, like the revival bottlings from Bruichladdich when they had the Laddie 10. So not the classic laddie that we get in the opaque bottle. In the very early days when they first started production again, they had a clear glass bottle with a blue label and it had a 10-year age statement on it, and it was a single vintage release, so it was all 10-year-old whiskey from the same year of distillation. And that really was the first one that really made me think, all these special casks and peat, it's nice, but you don't necessarily need it all. If you get a good whiskey and put it in a good bourbon cask, that can go a long, long way. You can have wonderful things just from good spirit in a good bourbon cask. And obviously that early Bruichladdich, that Laddie 10, it wasn't a high strength whiskey back then. It wasn't even 50% like they do now. It's just 46. But that one really put me on my journey towards seeking out more of these intense, straightforward bourbon cask quality whiskies, and I think this really fits the bill. As for the finish on this one, let's have another sip. More lime sweets, lime confectionery, wine, a little bit of a wine gum note, also a bit of a nutty peanut, sort of peanut brittle bourbon cask note. And when you put those two together, that little bit of lime fruitiness and that sweet peanut note kind of gives me a little bit of a pad thai feeling, which is a very unusual and a wonderful tasting note to get. Also lots of oakiness on the finish and late palate of this one. Quite a long finish with a pleasantly nutty dry edge. So keywords for this one on the palate and the finish: bright, very bright and fruity, slightly sharp with that dry edge. Exactly why I love bourbon cask maturations. So wonderful bourbon cask maturation, so they've really met the design spec for this one, being the Cotswolds bourbon cask. I do think that it's a fairly straightforward bourbon maturation. There aren't really any surprises in there. There's no rogue elements. It's kind of what you would expect. It's kind of the best you can expect from a young, high-strength bourbon matured whiskey. Excellent fruity character coming through from the English spirit, and heavy textbook bourbon notes from what I can only imagine are fresh first fill bourbon casks. Really is the perfect balance of spirit and cask. So who is this for? Who is this going to appeal to? I think that this is going to appeal a lot to people that like their bourbon matured whiskies like myself. Anyone that's enjoyed the recent bourbon matured releases from Loch Lee, this is actually remarkably similar. I'd say that this whiskey is probably a little bit less sharp and a little bit sort of full-bodied and richer and more on the caramel notes than the bourbon matured Loch Lees, but very, very similar ballpark. Anyone that likes their unpeated and unsherried Bruichladdich whiskies like the classic Laddie, although that's not strictly unsherried anymore, but people that like their malt-driven, bourbon matured, unmessed with whiskies, this is a good one for them. Perhaps like the Dalmunich that I had recently, the one with the werewolf thing on the label, whatever it's called. If you like that Dalmunich cask strength, or any of the singletons, anyone that appreciates those straightforward bourbon cask matured singleton releases, like the special release ones where you get a bit more of a higher ABV and a bit more of a quality production and presentation. If you like those kind of inoffensive singleton releases but you're looking for something with a bit better presentation, this is a good one. Although this obviously is a full craft artisan presentation with this one, which you very, very rarely get from singleton. And probably Balblair as well. If you like your Balblair 12-year-old, there's a lot of similarities between that and this. Wonderful maltiness, wonderful caramel malty notes coming through. I should probably also mention how this compares to the standard whiskey from the Cotswolds distillery. You know, the 46% signature one. I think this is really very similar stuff. It's got, you can tell that it's from the same distillery and it's got a lot of the same themes and the same notes, but this is really the same thing with a higher strength and without those STR casks, which I personally don't miss at all because I'm really not a fan of STR. And in my humble opinion, I think that this bourbon cask whiskey from Cotswolds, if they've got more of this in stock. Now that they're starting to get some more mature stock, I think this would be a wonderful replacement for that signature whiskey. I think it's plenty mature enough with just the bourbon. I think that it showcases the Cotswold spirit really, really well. And I think if you've had that signature whiskey, the 46% one with the STR from Cotswolds, and you enjoyed it, and why wouldn't you, because it's a fantastic introduction to the distillery, I'd really recommend trying this one too. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of the Cotswolds distillery if you've tried any of their releases, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.